I was 13 when I first smelled it. Damp wood, rusted metal, something else, something sour. It came from the floorboards beneath the pantry, where Grandma kept her pickles and her secrets. I asked her once, "What's down there?" She didn't look up. "History," she said. And history doesn't like sunlight. She had rules. No guests, no basement, no questions after sunset. And then I saw him. A man, thin, pale, sitting on a cot beside a stack of books. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was soft, British, sad. When I told her what I saw, she nodded. "His name is Edward," she said, "and he's been here longer than you've been alive." The revelation hung heavy in the air, a secret spanning decades, woven into the very fabric of our family's history. Every creak of the house, every shadow, now held a new, unsettling meaning, a silent testament to the man hidden below. Grandma's stern gaze, once just a part of her character, now seemed to hold the weight of a lifetime of guarded truths. The scent of damp wood and rusted metal, once just a childhood memory, became a constant, chilling reminder of Edward's presence. His soft, British voice, filled with sadness, echoed in my mind, a haunting melody of a life confined. The secrets of the past, buried deep beneath our home, were now unearthed, forever changing the landscape of my understanding. Every day brought new questions, new layers to the mystery, as I grappled with the reality of Edward's existence. The truth, once a distant whisper, was now a tangible presence, a shadow stretching across our family's legacy. I often wondered about his life before, the world he left behind, and the circumstances that led him to our hidden basement. Grandma's silence, once a source of frustration, now felt like a heavy cloak, protecting a story too painful to tell. The house itself seemed to breathe with the weight of its secret, every floorboard creak, every gust of wind, a sigh of untold stories. My childhood innocence had been shattered, replaced by a profound understanding of the complexities and sacrifices of love and loyalty. The man in the basement, Edward, was not just a secret. He was a living testament to a past that refused to stay buried. And Grandma, the keeper of this extraordinary secret, remained an enigma, her actions forever etched into the mystery of our family. There's a man in the basement, and Grandma put him there.
I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the house. Every sound felt louder, every shadow felt closer. Edward's voice echoed in my head. "I'm the man your grandmother forgot to bury." I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if I wanted to. The next morning, Grandma made tea like nothing had happened. She didn't ask if I'd slept. She didn't mention the basement. She just placed the cup in front of me and said, "Drink before it gets cold." I watched her hands, steady, wrinkled, capable of hiding a man for 17 years. After breakfast, I wandered the house. I wasn't looking for anything, but the house had a way of offering answers when you weren't asking. In the hallway closet behind a stack of old coats, I found a box. Inside, letters yellowed with time, a silver lighter, a photograph. The photo was black and white, faded. Grandma, younger, standing beside a man in uniform, not my grandfather. He died before I was born. This man was different, taller, thinner, British. I turned the photo over, in Grandma's handwriting, Edward, 1944. I stared at the name, the same name she'd whispered last night, the same man in the basement. I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not anger, something quieter, something like understanding. I took the photo to her. She was on the porch, cigarette in hand. I held it out. "Who is he?" She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "He was supposed to leave, but he didn't." I waited. She didn't continue. I asked, "Why did you keep him?" She exhaled smoke. "Because no one else would." That night I wrote in my journal, "She knew him, she loved him, and she buried him alive." I went back the next night. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt, or something quieter, like the need to understand. The hatch creaked open easier this time. The stairs didn't feel as steep. The air was still thick, but less hostile. Edward was awake, sitting on the cot, reading a book with no cover. He looked up and smiled. "You came back." I nodded. "I found your photograph." He closed the book. "Ah, the war years." I sat on the bottom step, flashlight off. The basement was lit by a single bulb, flickering like it had a secret. "Why are you here?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "She saved me," he said finally, "from a life I didn't want, from a country that forgot me, from a war that wouldn't let me go." I frowned. "But she kept you here, locked away." He nodded. "Yes, but not out of cruelty, out of fear, out of love." I didn't understand. Not yet. "She was young," he continued, "brilliant, lonely. I was a deserter, a coward, some would say. I ran from the battlefield and found her porch. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the door." He paused. "And then she never closed it." I asked, "Did you want to leave?" He looked at the ceiling. "At first. Then I realized the world outside had no place for me. Down here I was safe. I was remembered. I didn't know what to say. I just listened." "She read to me," he said. "Tolstoy, Woolf, Baldwin. She brought me books, food, silence. And when she married someone else, she didn't stop. She just buried me deeper." I asked, "Did she love you?" He smiled. "In her own way, the kind that doesn't ask for permission." I left quietly. Grandma was asleep in her chair, cigarette burned to ash. I placed the photo back in the box. That night I wrote in my journal, "He didn't ask to be hidden, but he chose to stay." The next morning, Grandma was humming, a low, tuneless sound, like something half-remembered. She was in the kitchen, slicing apples with the same knife she'd used for decades. I watched her hands. They moved with purpose, with history. I wanted to ask her more about Edward, about the war, about the years she kept him hidden, but I didn't know how to ask without breaking something. Instead, I said, "Did you love him more than Grandpa?" She didn't look up. "Love isn't measured like sugar," she said. "It doesn't come in cups." I waited. She kept slicing. "Your grandfather was safe. Edward was fire." I asked, "And you chose fire?" She paused. "I chose silence." That answer stayed with me. Later, I walked to the edge of the property, where the trees grew thick and the wind felt older. I sat beneath the oak and tried to imagine 17 years in a basement. No sunlight, no seasons, no change, just books, memory, and the sound of footsteps overhead. I couldn't decide if Edward was a prisoner or a guest. I couldn't decide if Grandma was a savior or a warden. That night, I returned to the basement. Edward was writing, a journal like mine. I asked what he was recording. He said, "The days I didn't live." I asked if he hated her. He smiled. "No, I just wish she'd let me say goodbye." I asked, "Why didn't you leave?" He looked at me. "Because sometimes love feels safer in the dark." I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about Grandma's hands, about Edward's voice, about the way silence can become a language. That morning, I asked Grandma, "Did you ever think about letting him go?" She said, "Every day." I asked, "Then why didn't you?" She looked at me, eyes tired. "Because I didn't know how to lose him twice." That night, I wrote in my journal, "She didn't keep him because she was cruel. She kept him because she was afraid of grief." I found the dress in the attic, wrapped in tissue, tucked inside a cedar chest that smelled of memory. It was pale blue, with lace at the collar and a tear near the hem. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't the kind Grandma wore now, cotton, plain, practical. This one was soft, romantic. I held it up to the light and saw a faint stain near the neckline. Wine, maybe, or blood, or something older. I brought it downstairs. Grandma was in the garden, trimming roses with quiet precision. I held up the dress. "Yours?" She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "I wore it the night he asked me to run." I waited. She didn't elaborate. I asked, Why didn't you? She clipped a rose. Because I was already married. I sat beside her. The sun was low. The air smelled of soil and regret. Did you love Grandpa? I asked. She nodded. In the way you love someone who never asks you to choose. I asked. And Edward? She didn't answer. She just placed the rose in my lap. That night, I returned to the basement. Edward was humming, a tune I didn't recognize. I asked, "Did you ask her to run?" He smiled. Twice. I asked, "Why didn't she?" He looked at the ceiling. Because she was braver than me. I didn't understand. Braver? He nodded. She chose the life that hurt less people, even if it hurt her most. I sat on the step, the dress folded in my lap. She kept it, I said, all these years. Edward closed his eyes. She never stopped being the woman who wore it. I confronted her the next morning, not with anger, with questions, with the weight of everything I'd learned. She was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal like it mattered. I stood in the doorway and said, "You kept a man hidden for 17 years. That's not love, that's prison." She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. "You're too young to understand," she said. I stepped closer. "Then help me." She sighed. "He was broken. The world didn't want him. I gave him a place to exist." I shook my head. "You gave him a cage." She turned slowly. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "You think love is clean? You think it's soft? Sometimes love is ugly. Sometimes it's survival." I asked. "Survival for who?" She didn't answer. I spent the afternoon in the basement. Edward was quiet. I asked if he ever resented her. He said, "Only when I remembered the sky." I asked if he forgave her. He said, "Forgiveness is for people who leave." I stayed. I didn't know what to do with that. That evening, Grandma sat on the porch, staring at the horizon. I joined her. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't do it for me." I asked, "Then who?" She looked at me. "For the version of him that still believed in kindness." I asked, "And what about the version of you?" She smiled faintly. "She died the day he knocked on my door." That night I wrote in my journal, "She buried herself with him, not in the basement, in the silence." I brought him a mirror. It was small, cracked at the corner, framed in brass. I found it in the attic, wrapped in a scarf that smelled like cedar and dust. I didn't know why I brought it. Maybe because I wanted him to see himself. Maybe because I wanted to see what he saw. He held it gently like it might shatter from memory alone. "I haven't looked in one for years," he said. "Not since the war?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not since I stopped being someone." I sat on the step, watching him. He turned the mirror slowly, catching the light. His face was thinner than I remembered, his eyes darker. "Do you think I look like a ghost?" he asked. I said, "You look like someone who forgot how to be seen." He smiled. "That's kinder than I deserve." I asked him what he missed most. He said, "Rain, not the sound, the feeling, the way it touches you without asking permission." I asked, "Did you ever ask her to let you go?" He nodded. "Twice. She cried both times, and then she made tea." I didn't know what to say, so I asked, "Do you think she loved you?" He looked at the mirror. "She loved the version of me that didn't need the world, and I became him for her." That answer stayed with me. Later, I asked Grandma why she never gave him a mirror. She said, "Because he already knew what he'd lost." I asked, "And what about you?" She didn't answer, just lit a cigarette and stared at the garden. That night, I wrote in my journal, "He became someone else to be loved," and she loved him because he stayed. I stopped talking at school, not on purpose, it just happened. Words felt heavier now, like they belonged to someone else. I'd sit in class, watch the chalk dust rise, and think about the man beneath my grandmother's house, about the woman who buried him in silence, about the girl who couldn't unlearn what she knew. I started writing more, not just in my journal, on napkins, on the backs of receipts, on the margins of textbooks. I wrote fragments, sentences that didn't belong anywhere. She chose silence. He chose her. I didn't choose anything. One afternoon, I skipped school and went straight to the basement. Edward was humming again, the same tune. I asked, what is that? He said, a song she used to sing before the war, before the porch, before the hiding. I asked, did she sing it for you? He nodded. Only once, the night I almost left. I sat beside him. The air was cooler now, less hostile. I asked, do you regret staying? He looked at me. Regret is a luxury. I chose what I could live with. I asked, and what about her? He smiled. She chose what she couldn't live without. I didn't know what that meant, not fully, but it felt true. Later, I asked Grandma about the song. She was in the garden, planting something I didn't recognize. I hummed the tune. She froze. Then she said, he remembered? I nodded. She didn't speak again, just kept planting. That night I wrote in my journal, I carry a secret that isn't mine, and it's changing me. Edward handed me a letter, folded, yellowed, edges soft from years of being held. I wrote this in 1946, he said, to my mother, never sent it. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, full of pauses. It began, I'm alive, but not the way you remember. I read it aloud. It spoke of rain, of silence, of a porch in Kentucky, of a woman who didn't ask questions, of a war that never really ended. It ended with, if you ever wonder where I went nowhere. I stayed. I asked why he never sent it. He said, because I didn't want her to come looking. I asked, were you afraid? He nodded, of being found, of being forgotten, of being forgiven. I didn't understand that last part, not yet. Later, I asked Grandma if she knew about the letter. She was in the attic, sorting through old linens. She paused. He showed it to me once. I told him to burn it. I asked why. She said, because it was written by a man who still believed he could go back. I asked, and you didn't want him to? She looked at me. I wanted him to stay, and I knew hope was a door. That answer stayed with me. That night, I returned to the basement. Edward was asleep, the letter beside him. I watched him breathe, slow, fragile. I wondered what it meant to choose stillness over freedom, to choose memory over movement, to choose love that never leaves the room. I didn't write in my journal that night. I just folded the letter and placed it in my own notebook, not to send, not to share, just to carry. It happened in the summer of '58. Grandma told me about it while peeling potatoes, her voice low, her hands steady. There was a knock at the door, she said, not the usual kind, the kind that knows your name. I asked who it was. She said, a man in uniform, British, said he was looking for a deserter. I froze. Edward. She nodded. I told him I hadn't seen anyone like that. He didn't believe me. I asked what she did. She said, I made him tea. I let him sit on the porch. I kept my hands from shaking. I imagined Edward, silent beneath the floorboards, listening to footsteps above him. I asked if he was afraid. She said, he didn't breathe for an hour. I asked if the man came back. She shook her head. But I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. That image stayed with me. Later, I asked Edward about it. He remembered everything, the sound of boots, the accent, the way Grandma's voice changed when she lied. I thought it was over, he said. I thought I'd be dragged back to a country that never wanted me. I asked, and what stopped them? He looked at me. Her silence. I didn't know what to do with that. Silence as protection, silence as violence, silence as love. That night, I sat on the porch with Grandma. The air was thick, the stars were quiet. I asked, did you ever think about what would happen if they found him? She said, every day. I asked, and you still kept him? She nodded, because some people are worth the risk. I didn't write in my journal that night. I just stared at the door, wondering what I'd say if someone knocked. I started dreaming about the basement, not nightmares, not visions, just quiet scenes. Edward sitting on the cot, reading. Grandma standing at the top of the stairs, holding a tray. Me watching from the shadows, unable to speak. In the dream, no one moved, no one aged, no one left. I told Grandma about it. She didn't react, just stirred her tea and said, "That's what silence does. It freezes things." I asked, "Did you ever think about what it cost?" She looked at me. "Every day." I asked what she meant. She said, "I stopped going to church. I stopped writing letters. I stopped being someone people remembered." I asked, "And for what?" She said, "View in for someone who remembered me." That answer stayed with me. Later I asked Edward if he ever thought about leaving, not escaping, just walking out. He said, "I did twice, once in 52, once in 61. I asked what stopped him. He said, "She cried both times, and I didn't want to be the reason she broke." I asked, "But weren't you already breaking?" He nodded. "Yes, but I broke quietly, she broke loud. I didn't know what to do with that." That evening, I sat in the garden with Grandma. The roses were blooming. The air smelled like memory. I asked, "Did you ever want to tell someone?" She said, "I did, once." I asked, "Who?" She said, "Your mother, before she died." I asked, "And why didn't you?" She looked at me, "Because I didn't want her to carry it." I realized then she hadn't just hidden Edward, she'd hidden herself from the world, from her family, from the version of her that used to believe in open doors. That night, I wrote in my journal, "She gave up being known so he could survive, and now I'm the only one who knows." I asked Edward if he ever said her name aloud. He paused. "Not in years." I asked why. He said, "Because names belong to the world, and she gave me a world without one." I didn't understand, not fully, but I felt the truth in it. Later, I asked Grandma the same question. "Did he ever call you by name?" She was folding laundry, slow and methodical. "Once," she said. "The night I told him he couldn't leave." I asked what it sounded like. She said, "Like someone remembering who I used to be." That answer stayed with me. I began to notice things. The way Grandma flinched when the phone rang. The way she never looked in mirrors. The way she paused before saying her own name to strangers, as if it no longer belonged to her. As if she'd handed it to Edward and never asked for it back. I asked Edward what he remembered most about her. He said, her silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of choices. I asked, "Did you ever wish she'd chosen differently?" He said, "Every day, but I never asked her to." I didn't know what to do with that. That evening, I sat with Grandma on the porch. The sky was bruised with sunset. I asked, "Do you ever think about who you were before him?" She said, "Sometimes, but it feels like fiction." I asked, "And now?" She looked at me. "Now I'm the woman who kept a man alive by forgetting herself." That night, I wrote in my journal, she gave him shelter. He gave her silence. And somewhere in between, her name disappeared. I started dreaming in his voice, not words, just tone, a quiet cadence like someone reading a letter they never sent. I'd wake up with phrases in my head. She kept me alive. I forgot the sky. You're the only one who knows. I didn't know if they were his memories or mine. I told Grandma. She didn't blink. "That's how it starts," she said. "You carry someone long enough, they start speaking through you." I asked, "Is that what happened to you?" She said, "I stopped knowing where he ended, and I began." That answer stayed with me. I began noticing things. I stopped laughing at school. I stopped answering questions I used to know. I started writing in margins again, not facts, feelings. She chose silence. He chose her. I didn't choose anything. One afternoon, I found a box in the shed. Inside, a pair of boots, a faded scarf, a tin of tea leaves. I asked Grandma what it was. She said, his things from before. I asked why she kept them. She said, because memory needs anchors. I brought the scarf to Edward. He held it like it was fragile. She wore this the day I arrived, he said. It smelled like rain. I asked, do you miss her? He looked at me. I miss the version of her that believed I was worth hiding. I didn't know what to do with that. That evening I sat on the porch alone. Grandma was inside, humming. Edward was below, silent. I felt like a bridge between two ghosts, one buried in silence, one buried in love, and me standing in the middle, unsure which way to fall. That night I wrote in my journal, I didn't ask for this story, but now it's mine. He forgot the year. It happened slowly, first the seasons, then the birthdays, then the names of books he'd read twice. I asked him what day it was. He said, somewhere between yesterday and never. I didn't know how to answer that. I told Grandma. She didn't react, just folded a towel and said, that's what happens when you live in a place without windows. I asked, did you know this would happen? She said, I hoped it wouldn't, but hope doesn't stop time. That answer stayed with me. I began writing down everything Edward said, not just the stories, the fragments, the pauses, the way he looked at the light bulb like it was a sun. I asked him once, do you remember your mother's face? He closed his eyes. I remember her voice. It sounded like forgiveness. I asked, do you remember your own? He said, only when I dream. I didn't know what to do with that. One afternoon I brought him a calendar. Blank, just numbers. I asked him to mark the days he felt real. He circled 3. I asked why those. He said, because you were here. Later I asked Grandma if she ever thought about taking him outside. Just once, just for air. She said, I did. In 49. He stood on the porch for 5 minutes. Then he asked to go back down. I asked why. She said, because the world moved too fast. That night, I sat in the basement with Edward. He was humming again. I asked, do you remember the song? He said, no, but I remember how it made her smile. I wrote in my journal, he's forgetting everything but her. It started with a cough, dry, hollow, like something trying to escape. I heard it through the floorboards while brushing my teeth. At first I thought it was the pipes. Then I heard it again and again. I went to the basement. Edward was sitting on the cot, pale, trembling. His hands shook as he reached for a glass of water. I asked if he was sick. He said, just tired. I asked how long it had been. He said, since the silence started echoing. I didn't know what that meant. I brought him soup. Grandma didn't ask why. She just handed me the bowl and said, don't let it get cold. I asked if she'd noticed the cough. She said, he's old. Old things creak. I asked, are you worried? She said, I stopped worrying when I started hiding. That answer stayed with me. Edward's breathing grew shallow, his voice thinner. He stopped reading, stopped humming, just stared at the ceiling like it held answers. I asked if he wanted a doctor. He said, doctors ask questions. I've run out of answers. I didn't know what to do with that. One night I found Grandma sitting on the basement stairs, not speaking, not moving, just watching him sleep. I asked, are you afraid? She said, I was. For 17 years. Now I'm just waiting. I asked, for what? She said, for the part of me that's still down here to let go. That night I wrote in my journal, he's fading, and she's unraveling, and I'm the only one who knows how it ends. The cold came early that year, the windows frosted before November. The garden died quietly. Grandma didn't replant. She just watched the soil harden and said, some things aren't meant to bloom twice. Edward stopped eating full meals, just sips of broth, pieces of bread. His hands trembled more, his voice thinned. I brought him blankets. He said, I used to dream of snow. Now I dream of warmth. I asked if he was afraid. He said, not of dying, just of being forgotten. That answer stayed with me. I asked Grandma if she'd ever thought about what would happen after. She said, I buried him once. I'll do it again. I asked what she meant. She said, the day I locked the hatch, I started mourning. I didn't know what to do with that. One afternoon, I found her writing a letter, not to Edward, to herself. I asked what it said. She handed it to me. It read, "You did what you could. You loved in silence. You kept him alive. You lost yourself, but you were never cruel." I folded it carefully and placed it in my journal. That evening, I sat with Edward. He was humming again, slower now. I asked, "Do you remember the porch?" He said, "I remember the way she looked at me, like I was already gone." I asked, "Do you want me to remember you?" He smiled, "Only if it helps you forget her." I didn't write in my journal that night. I just sat beside him, holding the letter, listening to the hum of a man who once believed in escape. He stopped humming. That was the first sign. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. I brought him tea. He didn't drink it. I read to him. He didn't respond. I asked if he was in pain. He said, "Only where memory used to live." I told Grandma. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just walked to the pantry, opened the hatch, and sat on the stairs. I followed her. Edward was awake, barely. She looked at him and said, "You stayed longer than I deserved." He smiled. "You gave me longer than I asked for." That answer stayed with me. I asked Grandma if she was ready. She said, "I never practiced goodbye. I only practiced hiding." I asked, "What will you do when he's gone?" She said, "I'll remember him in silence, the way I kept him." I didn't know what to do with that. Edward asked me to bring him the photograph, the one from 1944. I placed it in his hands. He stared at it for a long time. "She was brave," he said, "even when she lied." I asked, "Do you forgive her?" He said, "I forgave her the day she locked the door." That night I sat beside him. Grandma on one side, me on the other, no words, just breath, just the sound of a life slowly folding inward. I didn't write in my journal. I just held his hand and waited. He didn't wake up, not fully, just opened his eyes once, looked at the ceiling, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I leaned closer. He said, "Tell her I stayed." Then he closed his eyes again, and the room felt heavier. I told Grandma. She didn't speak, just walked to the basement, slower than usual. She sat beside him, placed her hand on his chest, and waited. I stood in the doorway, unsure if I was witnessing love or grief, maybe both. She whispered his name, once, softly, like it was a secret she'd kept too long. He didn't respond. She didn't cry. She just sat there, holding the silence like it was sacred. That answer stayed with me. I asked if she wanted help. She said, "No one helped me keep him. No one will help me let him go." I asked what she would do. She said, "I'll bury him, the way I buried the rest of me." I didn't know what to do with that. That night she wrapped him in a blanket, the same one he'd used for years. She placed the photograph on his chest. She lit a candle. She didn't speak. I watched from the stairs, feeling like a trespasser in someone else's goodbye. She didn't ask me to leave. She didn't ask me to stay. She just existed beside him as if time had folded in on itself. I didn't write in my journal that night. I just sat in the dark, listening to the stillness. It wasn't quiet. It was final. She buried him at dawn. No ceremony, no words, just a shovel, a blanket, and the soft hush of morning. I watched from the porch, wrapped in silence. The garden had been cleared days before. She dug where the roses used to bloom. It wasn't deep, it wasn't wide, just enough for a man who hadn't seen the sky in 17 years. She didn't cry, she didn't pause. She placed the photograph on his chest, covered him with soil, and pressed her palm to the earth like she was sealing a promise. That image stayed with me. I asked if she wanted help. She said, "I kept him alone. I'll bury him alone." I asked if she was okay. She said, "I don't know what that means anymore." Later, she burned the letters, the ones he wrote, the ones she never sent. The smoke curled into the air like memory leaving the body. She didn't watch it rise. She just turned away. I asked why she didn't keep them. She said, "Because they were written by a man who no longer exists." I didn't know what to do with that. That evening, I sat in the basement. Empty now, the cot gone, the books boxed, the air still thick, but quieter. I touched the wall where he used to lean. It was warm, as if memory had a temperature. I asked Grandma what she would do now. She said, "I'll learn how to be seen again." I asked, "And me?" She looked at me. "You'll carry him, but not forever." That night I wrote in my journal, "She buried him in the garden, but she buried herself long before." I stood at the edge of the garden. The soil was still fresh. The roses hadn't returned. Grandma was inside, asleep in her chair, the photograph resting on her lap. The house felt quieter now, not empty, just finished. I opened my journal. The pages were full, 17 entries, 17 years. I read them aloud, not to anyone, just to the wind, just to the silence, just to the part of me that had changed. I thought about telling someone, a friend, a teacher, a stranger. I imagined their faces, confused, disbelieving, curious. I imagined the questions, the judgment, the headlines. Girl discovers hidden man beneath grandmother's house. I imagined the world trying to explain what I still couldn't. I asked Grandma if she'd ever wanted the story to be known. She said, "Not while I was still living in it." I asked, "And now?" She looked at me. "Now it's yours." That answer stayed with me. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I just wrote it all down, every detail, every silence, every sentence he whispered. I placed the journal in a box, wrapped it in the scarf, buried it beside the roses. I didn't do it to hide. I did it to remember. One day maybe someone will dig it up. Maybe they'll read it. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't. But they'll know he existed, that she existed, that love in its strangest form lived in the quiet. That night, I wrote one final line. She kept him alive. I kept her secret. And now the silence belongs to me.